Hello, world. This is Americana, and I'm your host, Willie Montague. We're not here to play safe or stay silent. We're here to wake up the comfortable and comfort the bold. You already know where you're at. This is Americana. All right, everyone, as I said, welcome to Americana. We have a very special guest today, Mr. Armstrong Williams, a prominent conservative media figure, founder and CEO of Howard Stern Holdings, one of the largest minority-owned television station groups in the country, but also a co-owner of Baltimore Sun, the largest general circulation daily newspaper in the country. All right, we're going to dive right into today. We're going to have an awesome conversation. We have a lot jam-packed show. So, Mr. Williams, welcome to Americana.
I just wonder what it's taken so long.
Well, I'm excited. We're here. So, we're getting ready to dive into this conversation, you guys out here. What was the biggest takeaway from your interview with the FBI director about Operation Summer Heat?
You know, I think what was important about the conversation, Willie, is that there's so much emphasis on President Trump deploying the National Guard in cities where there's high crime across America. And what I realized in my conversation from Kash Patel is that the National Guard does not play a role in eliminating crime. It's basically a support system. What it does is free up resources like the FBI, the DEA, and the other law enforcement agencies to go in that community where you have high crime. What the National Guard is basically a support system. They can go and take care of areas like the museum, the National Mall, particularly in a place like Washington, D.C., where the National Park Service has lost a substantial part of its staff, where it's been reduced to almost 20. They also keep the place beautified. They clean up the graffiti. They're able to move the homeless and those into places where they're safe and where there are homeless shelters. And so what has happened is that in many of these cities, law enforcement, which like the resources, D.C. is a place that's down about 400 police officers. A place like Portland is down about 250. They allow these police officers to go out and do their job, do it better, work with the community, do community service, and do what they're designed and trained to do, and that is to stop crime. And so I think that was my biggest takeaway, and particularly when I asked them, well, why is all this attention focused on the National Guard? It says the National Guard has this thing called stature. It is something that sort of restores respect. And sometimes, particularly juveniles, they have a lot of fear with guys in uniforms, and sometimes their guns are bigger than they are. But it's more of a stature. It's more of an optic that they deploy. In terms of the real work and the heavy lifting, that's up to people who are really trained to stop the crime.
Well, you know, it's interesting because we hear a lot of conversation out here among, of course, social media always has something to say about everything. And in that conversation, I want to know, what do you think the public is getting the full story on how these cases are handled, or is it just more sound bites that some of these left-wing medias are putting out there?
Repeat the beginning of that question. I lost my sound there for a minute.
Okay, apologize for that. Just following up with that, you see a lot happening in social media. A lot of people are having a lot of talking points about what's going on, what the FBI is doing, how they're involving here. But do you think the public is really getting the full story, or is it just more sound bites that's coming out there?
Well, Willie, listen, the full story is for people who actually live in these communities, like Washington, D.C., Memphis, Tennessee, when they've seen firsthand how law enforcement has cleaned up gangs, repeat offenders, the carjacking, the car theft, where people inside their homes would not go out and take a stroll with their children. Schools were on lockdown. when you talk about 2 or 3,000 people have been locked up and criminals, and you look at the videos sometimes on social media from Memphis or Washington, D.C., say this is a new place, this place is safe, I can move freely, I don't feel threatened in my own community. I mean, it makes all the difference in the world. We always get outsiders telling us about how law enforcement is doing their job inside these jurisdictions where you find the president has deployed not only the National Guard, but increased their resources to help them fight crime. And if you, even at the No Kings protest this weekend, when I was privately talking to law enforcement and everyday people who live in Washington, D.C., they would say to you privately, I don't ever want to give President Trump credit, but I would tell you one thing, Washington, D.C. is much safer, and anybody who's lived here know that it's safer, and it's not the same place that it once was. Just listen to the people who live there. Ask the people in Memphis, Tennessee, whether they feel their lives are better and whether they feel less threatened. And they will rarely answer that.
You know, it's interesting because most people don't look at the safer side of it and see just how much safer you are in these communities. But I have another question, kind of taking a veer here. Should the FCC relax media ownership rules, given you own one of the largest minority-owned TV station groups and seeing what's going on? Do you think they should relax some of the media ownership rules?
Well, Willie, that is certainly, when it comes to the Federal Communication Commission, and its antiquated, I call it antiquated, regulatory framework that started with innovation and fair competition. You know, it's like, I'm sort of, sometimes you feel like you're the proverbial voice crying in the wilderness as one of the very few African-American owners of television stations. And think about this, complemented by ownership of the Baltimore Sun. I've repeatedly advocated for twin policies for the FCC to embrace to ensure local broadcasters avoid this extinction like newspapers and local radio stations. I mean, there are things that we do as local broadcasters, especially with localism in the sports, the wedding, covering stories that people can relate to, that people they grew up with, going and covering stories in schools. I mean, reporting crime. I mean, when there's particularly in our markets in a place like South Carolina, where there are always hurricanes. And when you realize that a hurricane's coming, we can tell people to move where they can find shelter. We tell them how far away that hurricane is. National networks cannot do that. There's things that we do that are so unique, Willie, that nobody else can move. And so the FCC should loosen its regulatory chokehold on the advancement of television to give entrepreneurs an opportunity to grow, because you cannot grow anymore by being a single entity, by having one local broadcast station here or there. You gotta, in order to survive, you gotta be able to grow. You gotta be able to acquire more television stations across the country. And one of the reasons why our television works so well, particularly in markets in Baltimore, where we have the newspaper, the Baltimore Sun, because we can cross-promote. We can cross-use resources, and we can sell advertising space and sponsorship space. It gives us an extra leverage in that market to grow as a twin tower. You have the television station, you have the print media there. So anything that gives us an advantage, because listen, you got to keep this in mind. You know, we're fighting against the Amazons, the Googles, the Apples. They're global. I mean, and they've gobbled up all the advertising dollars. I mean, you cannot compete with them, but they cannot. You're not going to find Amazon and Google and Apple in the local markets covering the stories that matters most to people in those communities, like what's going on in their church, whether there's a revival going on, or where the next gospel concert on, the kinds of things that connect the people in those communities that they care about, Willie.
So now let's follow this, because if we tie this in with the FCC and we know where they stand, let's tie this in kind of dealing with, since you are the owner of the Baltimore Sun, so why acquire the Baltimore Sun in an increasingly digital, struggling newspaper environment? Why would you think that would be something to do as you see what's happening with this environment?
Well, no owner is the same. No community is the same. Historically, Willie, newspapers have been highly profitable, and some owners are aimed to revive these businesses by finding new and innovative ways to generate businesses And the thing about the Baltimore Sun, which was founded in 1837, along with the New York Times, it's one of the few profitable newspapers in the United States. And listen, local newspapers are vital for providing essential information about local government, schools, and community matters, city council meetings, things that impact the community. Owning a newspaper can build a company's brand and
Real fast,
customer base for other
Mr. Williams,
services.
don't go nowhere. We know this is good. We got to take a quick commercial break. We know you'll be with us.
Okay.
So you guys, thank you so much for tuning in with us on Americana. We'll be right back, of course. Just have to take a quick commercial break. This is Americana.
Mr. Montague, does it sound okay on your end?
Yeah, it's fine. Sounds good.
Okay, good.
All right, you guys, welcome back. We have with us Mr. Armstrong Williams. We just had a discussion talking about the newspaper industry, but this one to kind of follow with that, Mr. Williams. So would you say you're trying to preserve journalism or reinvent it in your own way? Because in this era, owning a paper isn't just about printing news, it's about shaping narratives. So what's your end game? Influence, innovation, or impact? What would you say is the end game here?
All of the above, Mr. Montague. So many people have lost trust in media, especially with the advent of social media, that are not held to the same standards of guidelines with the FCC. We're accountable. We cannot put out misinformation and disinformation. We cannot create lies for clicks because we can lose our license. And even though I grew up in a very conservative family, and that was based on my moral striving, my faith in God, which is what I define as conservatism, I do not take my ideology in the newsroom. In the newsroom, I'm a referee. I'm not there to promote a conservative or a liberal agenda. Our agenda is to promote all voices, celebrate all voices, all opinions, all perspectives, because all those perspectives are representatives of people in your community, and bring the facts about. So whether it's criticism of the president and his policy of deportation, or whether it's giving praise to the president for what seems to be a ceasefire that's holding between Hamas and Israel, because people are intelligent enough to find the truth and the facts. Too often people use their media platform to manipulate a certain opinion, persuade a certain poll. We don't do that. The corner of our realm is trust. Just present the facts and allow people to walk away with their own opinions. You know, everything about us is integrity. It's about honor, and it's about trust. And if people trust you and you're not busy in your time retracting or pulling stories that they find to be false, you find that you can grow and expand your brand, not only in that marketplace, but throughout this country, because we have a national brand.
Now, Mr. Williams, you spoke a lot, and I like what you said earlier about the faith and what makes up conservatism, because often people do not know, and they run away from the term conservatism because they think it's always attached to, would say, Republican ideologies or what they may see in media. And so following with that, as you talk about classrooms or students and building up this generation, so any updates on the crisis in the classroom lawsuits you plan to challenge? and assist school districts, which to me would be important. I work with youth and important in how we handle our children, especially as you talk about faith. So do you have any updates you can provide with us in these lawsuits?
You know, Mr. Montague, what is really criminal in this country is how the fact that so many kids go through school and graduate illiterate, it cannot read,
Yes.
cannot do basic math, basic reading, and do not understand civics and who we are as Americans. The greatest asset that I had growing up as a child, the best department of health, education, and welfare I had was my mother and father. They instilled in us to go to the library, to read books with them. Because, you know, the intellectual gap in education literally happens before the child ever enters kindergarten. So reading is very critical because reading takes you places. And so what's unfortunate now, we don't value teachers because of the way we pay them. The classroom has turned into an area of violence against parents because you have unruly kids that are not there to learn. They're undisciplined, and it's disrupt the educational structure for other kids. This is why kids choose choice in education, a private education, because a parent want to give their child every opportunity to learn. One size does not fit all. You have these crowded classrooms. And I believe that every child has the capacity to learn. I don't care how difficult it is for that child to finally get started. You got to find the enthusiasm, what makes that child kick, what makes them come alive learning arithmetic, what makes them come alive writing essays. And once you find that, you created a ticking bomb. Every child can learn. No child should ever be labeled as not able to learn. And
Now,
that
Mr.
starts
Williams,
with the teacher, and it's
before you go,
reinforced with the parents.
where do you see the greatest resistance? Because I know what you're saying is something that most people be like, yeah, but there has to be some resistance out there. So where do you see your greatest resistance, especially when we start talking about education real fast? We're going to move on. We got some fire chat questions for you, but what do you say is your greatest resistance with this?
You know, when you're the media and you're on the platform and you give teachers and parents in the community the microphone and let them bring change. We've seen so many disruptions in places with state of Texas where now school vouchers and school choices all across the state. We've seen them overturn students, superintendents who were not really teaching education but political correctness, and the fact that one size does not fit all. So we don't have, the only barriers that we have is how fastly we can get to other markets and do our town hall meetings, which we do across the country, to empower parents and teachers to change the educational structure and give parents a greater voice in their child's education.
Whew. Well, I believe that we do need to have parental choices. I know that the government sometimes trying to cross over, and so we get ready to hit some bullseyes here. Do you believe the country is headed in the right direction?
It depends upon who you're talking to. These are very uncertain times. The government is shut down. Our own leaders in both Congress can't seem to come together as adults to continue the opening of the government where federal workers are being furloughed, unlike congressmen who are millionaires and not missing their paychecks because they're still getting paid. And what they don't realize, everyday Americans, whether they're federal workers or whatever, they can miss one payment and it can place them into financial ruin. And what we should do is think about everyday Americans and what we can do to move the ball forward, to empower them with their families, to empower them with their economics, to empower them at the pump, empower them at the grocery store. And so there's so much divisiveness in this country right now. And so it just depends on who you're talking to. Most Americans have a lot of uncertainty. Certainly, we're doing all we can with the issue of crime, but some people don't really understand the president's agenda and trying to clean up crime to make their community safer because you turn it into us versus them. So it all depends who you're talking to. Are you better off now that Trump is president of the United States? Are his tariffs making your life better? Some people realize that they have to exact some pain and some discomfort until we see the full-blown effect of these tariffs. So it all depends on who you're talking to.
Now, Mr. Williams,
at the end of the day,
I heard some comment. I want to mention this is going to be a big two-part question for you, if you're ready. Did you ask FBI, Kash Patel, director of the FBI, about the Epstein files? And then If so, yes or no, should the Epstein files, in your opinion, do you think they should be released?
I did not ask him about the FBI files. I think their rollout of the Epstein, they had it built up as if there was something there and we realized it was smoke and no fire. I think it has been vetted by the New York Times, by the Washington Post, by the networks, that Trump was not aligned with Epstein. He was not involved in any of that ugliness and the trafficking of young girls. But should the files be released? Absolutely. But that is not necessarily in the hands of the Justice Department or the FBI. The courts must make that decision. And so far, the courts have prohibited the release of these files.
Now, this is a big question because it's going on. I believe today marks day 21 of the government shutdown. And I know we've seen this in different administrations, but who is to blame for this government shutdown, Mr. Williams? Because I know fingers are pointed, but really who's at the foundation of this? Because we need our government back open and we need people to feel secure in the United States. So who is to blame for this?
All 535 members of Congress, 100 in the U.S. Senate and 435 in the House. It's all about one-upmanship, who's to blame, whether it's health care, whether it's a simple vote on a line item budget. The bottom line is that we elected them to be effective in running and operating this government. It's easy to point fingers. The American people should unite in unison to demand that members of Congress open this government, because it's not as if we've not seen this before. And this is one of the rare times and one of the longest times in history that the federal government has been impacted. Law enforcement is not being paid. It's being impacted at the airports with TSA and pilots. The lines are long. It is really further impacting and eroding the economics of this country. So they're all to blame.
Now, before we go, just want to ask you real quickly, what would you like to leave behind, or is there anything else you would like to share?
You know, I'm just so happy to be on this platform. I've followed this platform. You know, I believe in diversity of opinions, the diversity of media. We don't have enough minority voices in these platforms. And anytime I can see these different perspectives, because there are things that you bring to your platform that I cannot, but it all is about localism and your national and your international audience. And just, I always encourage media, man. And I know it's not easy. It's a rough landscape out there when you're a media owner with advertisers and the rules continue to change and you have to compete against the big technology companies. So I just want to give a shout out to this network.
Well, thank you so much for being with us. We definitely got to bring you back. Thank you so much. Well, you guys out there, this has definitely been an episode. That's a wrap for today's episode of Americana. You already know I'm your host, Willie Montague. Thank you for staying with us and locking in. We'll be back tomorrow.